This is Spare Time Repair, and this is a Pioneer double cassette deck. It's the model CT-W604RS, and it's quite similar to the Kenwood model I looked at recently, but by all accounts this one was a bit more highly regarded. There's no date on the back of the deck, but according to Hi-Fi Engine it was manufactured between 1994 and 1996. It has Dolby B, C and S noise reduction, and apparently quite a sophisticated self-calibration system for recording. And the mechanisms actually look fairly clean. This is deck A, and deck B is in a similar condition. I managed to pick this up for just $9 at a thrift store. Apart from being quite grubby cosmetically, when we turn it on, the display is incredibly dim. You can probably barely read that. And when we pop in a tape, it attempts to play in both directions. But just can't get anywhere. Fast forward doesn't work either. Neither does rewind. And on deck B, it does play, but it won't fast forward, and so the belt's clearly getting weak on that side as well. So it looks like we need to do a double belt change on this, and also see if we can get that display looking a bit brighter. No screws on the side for this one, they're all on the back. The belts feel slack, but they haven't disintegrated, so there won't be a big clean up there. So let's have a look at what deck A is doing when we press play. Well, obviously everything's moving, but it's not enough to take up the actual tape. So it's just cycling back and forth endlessly. I'm going to start by trying to remove the front panel. Just unplug the machine. So I'm hoping this just lifts up. Yep, got a grounding wire here. Pop the screw back in so I don't lose it. And then we've just got this connector at the bottom, and that appears to be all that's connecting deck A to the board. Okay, that's out. Deck A is now free. Deck B looks similar. This time the grounding wire is at the bottom. The plug at the bottom is slightly bigger on this one. No doubt because it's a recording deck. It's a little tricky to access the grounding wire screw. That is now off as well. You can see the hole for it there just at the bottom. I don't think these door fronts come off. Looks like they're completely integrated. So I'm also going to disconnect this central flat flex cable. That's just a friction fit. And now hopefully the front panel can come off. There are two screws on either side and one at the bottom in the middle. And they all look like the same kind of screws, so I'm not going to get them mixed up. Yes, that has now completely freed up the front panel. So we've got a screw in each corner. This is the grounding screw I removed earlier, which I guess I didn't really need to put back. Now, will this lift out? Yeah, one spring has just fallen out. You can see it in the bottom there. Not sure where that came from. It's probably this pinch roller. Actually, I think it came from here because there's another identical one on this side. Over this post here, and then hooks behind there. And yeah, I don't know if you can see, but at the bottom of these holes here, there's a screw. Another one here. And that is what's holding the motor in place. So we need to remove those in order to get the belts off. So the motor's not going to come away entirely because it's connected with this ribbon cable, but it's going to lift off far enough just to release the belt. And yeah, it's just gone hard. There's no give in it anymore, and it's just shiny and slippy. Hopefully I've got a generic belt that will replace it because I don't have the actual kit for this machine. And this other belt should just slip off. Capstans are secured in place with these circlips, so I'm going to remove them and try not to ping them across the room. I got worried for a second that there were broken teeth on this gear, but it's possible it's meant to be like that. I hope so, because if they are broken, this deck is going to be unrepairable. This flywheel is plastic, but it's got a bit of weight to it, so there's probably some metal inside. Going to remove that other circlip. This one's got a spring on it. Presumably there's a bit of a clutch. It's actually pretty clean. I'm not sure I even needed to remove it. Yeah, there's barely anything coming off that. Yeah, I don't think those are broken teeth because we've got the same pattern here and here. And although this looks like a chewed tooth, it isn't. And this is just white grease. There's a segmented wheel at the top here, which is passing in front of a sensor. And so when this turns, I think that's what's going to be operating the tape counter. So every time the sensor beam is interrupted by one of these segments, it's going to count forward 1. So I found some replacement belt candidates. They're about the same size, but they're a lot more grippy. This one's a bit distorted, but I'm hoping it'll be okay. There's actually some grease on this pulley which is getting on the belt, so I need to clean that up first. I need to put the washer on first. Now I need to hook this around the motor pulley, drop that into place. I should have oiled the motor, so I'm going to take it off again. I'm going to put a very small drop in here. Being careful, of course, not to get any oil on the pulley itself. Right, so let's do that again. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to resecure the motor with these 2 screws in the front again. And again, pushing the mechanism up to clear the hole. So I will just give the head a clean, although it looks in pretty good nick. And it looks like these pinch rollers will unclip. I just move this post. So I've given those a good scrub, whether they needed it or not. So that completes the servicing of deck A. Now I just need to do the same on deck B. And since this one will be identical, you don't need to see me do that, so I'll do it off camera. Just to show you that the other deck has exactly the same missing teeth pattern in this cog. So that's the other deck serviced, nothing to report really, exactly the same process. I think I called it deck B, it's actually deck A because I've got the front panel flipped over and so it was on the right, but it is deck A. So now I need to remove this front panel and see if there's anything I can do about that dim display, and it will also give me a chance to clean up the plastic. Again, all these screws are identical, which is ideal. 7 screws holding that in, just a couple of clips at the top. So here's our display board, not much going on here apart from a ton of tactile buttons and the Dolby and tape direction switches. But what we're interested in is this vacuum fluorescent display. Now these can sometimes be rejuvenated by injecting voltage into these pins at the end, which are the heater wires that run across the display. If you make those glow hot for a few seconds, it can improve the display and make it brighter. I've never actually tried it before, but I think it's worth a go. So the first step is to disconnect the pins from the board so that you're not injecting any voltage where it shouldn't be. I'm going to apply just a little bit of flux. I'm just going to use some solder braid. Now those pins appear to be unfastened, so I'm going to very carefully try to bend them out of the way. Yep, those 2 are now out. I'm a bit nervous about this. You only get one chance really. If it goes wrong, then the display is killed forever. So I've turned the voltage down to 0, and then I can build up slowly. I'm actually going to turn these lights off so you can see a bit better what's going on. So we connect one side to here, the other side to here, and then I'm going to very gently increase the voltage. And I may need to go to, I don't know, 12 volts. It depends when the wires start glowing, really. Going very gently. Okay, I can now see they're starting to glow. I'm going to go a bit higher. I don't know if I dare go any higher than that. I'm going to drop it down again. Apparently you want to do this about 3 times. Okay, so I'm going to crank it up again. Starting to glow. Up to 9 volts. I'm going to drop it down again. Wait a few seconds. Now I'm going to do it one more time. Well, I hope that works because I don't fancy doing it again. Just noticed actually that the inside of the display here is actually quite grubby. So that may have played a part. So I'm going to give that a good clean. Yeah, look how dirty that is. Going to use a little microfiber cloth to polish that up. So it looks like all these buttons will just lift out. Well, that's good, it'll make them very easy to clean. And hopefully these doors will come out now. Right, so with the front panel disassembled as far as it can go, I can get in there and clean off all this dust. So I've washed all the front panel components in soapy water and I'm just letting those air dry. And while I'm waiting, I'm going to reconnect these heater wires to the main board. They're poking through just far enough to enable me to solder them in okay. So this board should now be ready to reconnect and test. So I think everything is now dry enough to reassemble. I had to be really careful with these buttons, especially this middle row. See, that's very delicate indeed. Yeah, I think it goes like that. So just hook it over there for now. Actually, these cogs come out, so I think it's going to be safer to remove those. There we go. Now if I clip this gear back in, feels a lot slower than it was before. So maybe this spring is not in the right place. So with everything back in place, we can now refit our mechanisms. So this is deck A because we're upside down. It's definitely slower than it was before. So same with deck B. So now we can reunite our parts. So I'm going to have to reconnect everything just to test it. It's all a bit wobbly, so I'm going to reinsert these screws on the side. I've got one more in the bottom. I'm just reconnecting these grounding wires. Actually, I think this was the one that went at the bottom, but I can't see any reason why it shouldn't go at the top. So I'm going to leave it there. And finally this flat flex cable. Right, I think that is it. We're ready for testing. And please let that display work better than it did. Well, I think that's An improvement. I think it could probably be better, but it's more readable than it was. But of course that's irrelevant if it doesn't actually work, so I'm going to plug my headphones in. Have our new belts done the trick? There's still something wrong. Yeah, it's not fast forwarding properly. Yeah, the take-up reel's not working. Do we have any more joy with deck B? That's not fast forwarding either. And the rewind's incredibly slow. Well, obviously I was using generic belts rather than a kit specifically designed for this machine, but I'm still surprised that's not working. I wonder if the motor's just a bit seized up. She's playing, but it's not taking it up, so it's just spooling the tape out inside. I'm now wondering whether these belts I put on are too loose, because I went for one the same size when the original may have been stretched, so perhaps a tighter one would solve that issue. So I'm going to remove this belt and find a slightly smaller one. This one is significantly smaller. I think it's worth trying that. Well, it's still turning freely, but will that solve the problem? I still think this one's okay. Probably worth testing this motor while I've got it open. Just check that it's spinning freely. So I've replaced these belts on both decks. I checked both motors on the bench power supply and they're both running fine. So really, what else can a man do? Just looking at these door springs, it looks like there's something in there that may have snapped off at some point. I didn't notice anything break off when I was removing them, but it would make sense for it to snap off with this tension against it. Perhaps there was something that was forcing this part of the spring back to here maybe, which does create more tension. Yeah. So here we are, ready to test again. I'm going to plug it in. Is that display brighter? Maybe that's as good as it gets. I obviously don't know what it looked like originally. It's hard to kill the reflections as well, but it looks okay. But will it work now? Well, it's looking more promising. Fast forwarding freely now. And rewinding. Plug in the headphones.
Wenn du stark genug bist, so hilf mir, den Baum aus dem Wald heraus.
So deck A now appears to be fixed. Let's see what we've got with deck B. Yeah, so it must have been that belt. The original one I put on was just too slack. And I guess that display is as good as it's going to get. So I'm going to check the speed now with my calibration tape. So this will play a test tone at 3 kilohertz, which I can measure on my app here. So it's actually pretty close. So I've got an adjustment potentiometer here, which I think is the one we need. And that is now pretty much bang on. So we'll do the same with deck B, which has a different potentiometer. Again, this one's not far out. And again, I think that's as good as I can get it. So we're all back together and I'm really pleased with this deck, so much so that I'm going to put it into service as my main machine. I'm disappointed about the display. I was hoping to get that brighter, but it's not a massive problem and certainly something I can live with. Another thing I like about it is that as well as a tape counter, you can have a real-time counter, which I think is a feature more tape decks should have. It's also cleaned up very well, and apart from a few scuffs, it's very presentable indeed. So I'm calling time on this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.